Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is returning guest Phil Illy. Phil Illy has written a book titled Autoheterosexual, Attracted to Being the Other Sex, wherein he expands upon the Ray Blanchard typology of a certain type of transsexual. And that type of transsexual is otherwise known as the autogynephile, or a man specifically who is attracted to the thought of being rather than being with a woman. Phil Illy, in his book, breaks down a ton of research, expands the typology to include females, and in this discussion, we talk about autoheterosexuality and what that means to somebody who is spun that way, let's say, and how that interferes with or facilitates their connection to other people, what that does to relationships, and how that informs the desire to transition. So without further ado, here is Phil Illy. People are still commenting on the first one.
Yeah, hopefully nicer than the first day, but
What are you going to do?
yeah. No, it's YouTube, but yeah, what are you going to do?
It's YouTube and it's Pride Month, so people are all going to be like totally on fire for this discussion.
Right, they're hyped up. Yeah.
They are. They can't get enough of it. I'll just do this. I'm just like make it.
Thank you for doing your part to support Pride by having me on.
Yeah. Okay, totally. What are we proud of today, Phil?
We're proud of the sexual orientation that most commonly leads to transgenderism.
Okay. It's an orientation, not a paraphilia or a fetish. So this is another thing that came up in the comments, the last one. Like, I don't really know the difference between those things, other than people just use it with different, like, moral weight to it.
Right. That's the thing is sexologists, they differentiate based on paraphilias and sexual orientations just for like theoretical ideological reasons of like where do these things come from. But in terms of how they play out in a person's life, there's a lot of similarity between what we call paraphilias and sexual orientations in that it's an enduring sexual preference for a particular class of stimuli. And
Okay.
it's just, yeah, using the words paraphilia or fetish generally just has the moral connotations, or it's just like it's a sexuality we don't like. It's sort of how it's used.
Yeah. And a fetish would be something with a little extra bells and whistles, or a kink. That's another term.
Right.
That implies that kind of a special thing or like some sort of targeted fixation.
Those terms are generally in common speech. They're used like just to talk about sexual interests that you shouldn't count as important as the more conventional ones.
Yeah.
But it can be hard to differentiate.
Like I have an orientation towards women, but a fetish for women in high heels. Right? That's how it's kind of used.
Right. Like, yeah, you could, that is one way of using it. Or like how in common speech it would be used.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't expect to see that type of language in like a sexology paper, but definitely in terms of common speech.
And your book, Autoheterosexual,
I have physical
attracted
copies
to
now.
being attracted to being what?
Attracted to being the other sex.
The other sex, the opposite sex. Which is, it straddles the line between, I mean, just the tone of it is common. You're addressing like the lay reader, but you draw upon a lot of research. So you're dealing with research or sexologist frameworks and then building an argument.
Translating it into normie speak.
Yeah.
The best I can.
Yeah. And how has that process been for you, going through the whole book? Researching it.
It was a big intellectual journey.
Oh.
And I mean, also emotional journey in the sense of having to, come to terms with having the orientation that I didn't know about. And then also, once I'm open about it, having to deal with other people that have the orientation telling me that it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Is that a part of
like
the orientation?
transsexuals.
It's kind of like Schrodinger's orientation. Like it only exists, but you can't mention it.
Yeah, I don't know. We have to run studies to figure that one out.
Like dress up club, kind of Fight Club, but dress up club.
Hey, dress up club sounds fun. Yeah, I could
But
get down with that.
why do you think there's such a defensiveness around it? Because of the political aspects of the identity?
Um, there's a worry about the consequences of if this knowledge becomes public knowledge, that it'll negatively impact how people treat transsexuals and gender nonconforming people. There's like that consequential worry. There's also just emotionally the people that have are bought fully into the idea that they're, the other sex or the gender associated with it, like without qualifications, they're just like, I'm this thing. A lot of them can't handle hearing that that feeling comes from a type of heterosexuality that's connected to their birth sex because it is the theory conflicts with their self-image in a way that it's just some of them they just can't compute it almost. It's too intense of a contradiction.
I guess this is kind of like difficult to say why because it's a case by case basis, but there is, and then also the impact of the internet culture and the social justice, like the whole folding of it into a political movement where people need to change how they behave or treat different people or see different people, and how that's tied to a very moral importance. Like this is a part of the American cathedral. America's been building, we had this whole like Declaration of Independence, this whole Enlightenment thing, but we scrapped that. And now we're doing the civil rights thing. We're pursuing equality, diversity, and inclusion, not freedom and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, right? That's kind of morphed into something else. So the transsexual is at the forefront at this point in time, and we'll see how far it goes when it's done with the transsexual. It's at the forefront of this political, religious, American religious kind of movement. So introducing the concept of sexuality into that, you would think that it would track because homosexual acceptance was spear-fronted, but the transsexuals, they're supposed to be a part of the sexuality thing, but they're not a sexuality at the same time, right? So even
Right.
that
Yeah.
flag contradicts this. Wait, is this a sexuality? No, it's not. But it's a part of the sexuality flag. No, it's not. It's the identity. It's not sexuality. I'm throwing a lot of
Right.
things
Yeah.
out of there because it's just kind of the phenomena itself is mixed up with so many different things.
Yeah. It's and what you're describing with the gender religion that's happening right now is I definitely see it. And um
What do you see
yeah.
it as? How does it impact
Oh,
you?
um well, I mean, I'm generally not a fan of religion just in general. I've been an atheist like since ever I thought about religion. Um, but I guess what bothers me about it is that when the type of thinking is religious rather than more scientifically based, there's this moral weight to it that then triggers people's emotions and then they can't use their reasoning abilities as well. And it leads to a bunch of, emotions being hurt and people getting in fights that didn't need to happen in the first place.
It was probably my fault, but I replied to ContraPoints or Natalie Wen, who's a stellar YouTube sensation.
She's amazing at her video essays. Yeah.
Video essays, philosophy, now culture war stuff, more and more infrequently produced, but excellently produced. And she had slagged on the New York Times, I think, by saying ratio against this, transcritical article. That was probably pretty milquetoast because the New York Times has a certain mandate. And I'm like, well, if people understood this as a sexuality more, maybe more understanding would happen. And I linked your video and I was blocked immediately.
She hadn't blocked you yet?
No,
Oh, okay.
I don't think she cared. I don't think they cared
Right.
about me, but putting up that, maybe I phrased it wrong. Maybe it's just like block anybody who's poking at this, but just mentioning the sexuality thing did
I've
to
seen her
some
do that
extent
before. Like,
trigger.
say like I've seen her post the Instagram video and then some comments said like this is happening because you're a meta attracted AGP and then she deletes those comments, you know. Um, yeah, it's she did
Is
a
that
whole 50-minute.
slanderous? Yeah.
Um,
Or just stupid,
they
you think?
is what stupid.
I mean, from Natalie Wynn's point of view, from Counterpoint's point of view, is it just like to
Right.
get the noise, filter the noise, or is there some sort of like I already answered this thing,
Right.
or
It's probably
maybe
a
it's some sort
combination
of
of
insult?
like I already answered this and it's just the only transphobes say this, so it's not worth even
Okay.
paying attention to you. You
Yeah.
know, that
Okay.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's like a shibboleth that says you're not in her tribe.
Okay. Yeah. For sure. Okay. Yeah. And then we're going to talk to your book, so we're just kind of wheedling our way there. But transphobia, have you come across any studies on that? Is that a sexual orientation or a fetish?
Uh I haven't really I tend not to read a lot of the transphobia studies or
So
I
there
just
are studies out there, or
right,
studies.
yeah, there's a lot of money and institutional weight put into, say like studying transphobia or homophobia or minority stress theory.
Yeah.
Um, and but I've I generally perceive those as pretty ideologically motivated. So it's I don't have too much interest in reading them.
Yeah. Okay. How does it figure? Do you touch upon it in your book? Do you touch upon this aspect, the aspect of acceptance, social acceptance, in your book?
Um, yeah, like later on in the book, I touch on that.
Yeah.
Just a little bit about, culturally integrating this into society.
Yeah.
Just talking about it briefly, because my book it's not, I'm not trying to do the moral game of like what we ought to do so much. Like I throw some stuff in there because I do have opinions, but I'm mostly just trying to describe this is what this orientation is. This is how, here are many patterns we've seen that repeat among people that have it. And, just so that people that have the orientation can sort of interpret their experience better.
Yeah. Yeah. One refrain in the comments of our last video was, this is kind of like the radical feminist point of view, that how could you possibly know what it's like to be a woman? You're a man. And it's to try to, I guess, poke a hole in the fantasy, and then also to preserve female rights. So when or spaces, however you need to interpret what radical feminism is aiming for politically. How have you come to view that criticism? If a man wants to be a woman, a man can't ever know what it's like to be a woman. So it's a complete fantasy. It's invalid, or it needs to happen. Needs to be contained within a bedroom or your own head, but not brought into the cultural sphere.
Um, I like while I know that technically, um, like I, for instance, cannot know what it feels like to be a woman. I'm kind of suspicious that everyone has an innate sense of gender identity anyways. I feel like not everyone does. And um the thing the experience I have of sometimes having that inner feeling of femininity, because I understand what it is, I don't, you know, think of myself as a woman, but it is a very nice feeling that happens.
Okay.
So I do like the feeling, but I sort of contextualize it as a byproduct of a sexual orientation.
Okay. We've covered this before. So switching from speaking to or addressing the rad fem critique to describing it in such a way that men, specifically males who have this, understand it more from your point of view, or like they gain more understanding from your point of view from hearing you speak about it. Like, why is that so nice? What is that feeling? Is it like you have a hot flash, and then you
But
pout in the corner, or you get a divan and you kind of like languish
I
and,
mean,
and
that's
have a
nice.
fainting
Yeah.
spell or something?
Painting on a chaise lounge is always a nice activity.
Yeah, does that bring
But
you trans joy? Euphoria? I'm
um,
sorry.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it can. Um,
Hmm.
I I actually wrote a significant proportion of the book sitting on a chaise.
Oh,
So not
just
not
like,
draped like on my side or anything, but yeah, they're nice. Um, yeah, it's
because I'm bringing that up, and I'm joking, but I'm not joking, because that feeling of femininity needs to be performed in some way, like by a gesture, right? It's not just like some free floating feeling; it's a bodily feeling, so it has to have bodily results beyond just like the male excitement, to
well,
euphemize that. But
there's a lot of ways of invoking it. You know, you can invoke it through behaviors or through, how you dress or, you know, how you think. You can once you know how to tap into that feeling, which I call this type of feeling a mental shift, which is language I appropriated from people that have non-human identities. Um, Basically, yeah, there's this inner feeling of being a thing, and it makes you feel good and connected with yourself and more like in the present moment and at home in yourself. And it's satisfying, and it's very similar to the warm fuzzies you get from conventional courtship, you know, from like cuddling with Bay on the couch or whatever, So it's yeah, it's a likable feeling, and then that reinforces the behaviors that led to it, which sort of leads to a developmental process of increasing cross-gender commitment and cross-gender identification.
yeah, I'm a cuddling with myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yourself is always there. You might as well.
Okay. Yeah. And how does that go off the rails, or what is your approach to managing that? And there's a lot of different layers for yourself. Like to what degree do you think it's healthy to indulge in that or to express that? To what degree is it unhealthy to suppress that, or to either give in or to suppress it? Like, how have you developed strategies or copes, or just discipline around it?
Um, well, I mean, a lot of how I deal with it is constrained by my physical circumstances of my large skeleton and
Mm-hmm.
basically transsexualism, or at least passing, is just not on the table for me. So I'm somewhat constrained in terms of that. Um, if I had a skeleton that was more suitable for passing, I'd probably be doing the transition thing. Um, at least the medical stuff, I would do that first before the social. Um, but yeah, there's like no one size fits all for how to deal with this. It's like a very individual decision based on, a lot of it is how you look. And a lot of it is also how strong the orientation is. Because if it's like by far your principal like motivating part of your sexuality, then it's going to have a huge sway over your emotions and a huge ability to create meaning and direction in your life. And so, yeah, if you have the orientation more strongly, that'll also make a person more likely to transition. But I generally think it's not good to, I think a middle ground will work for most people, where full on repression, I think, is not a good path for it. Yeah, full on repression, I think, it leads to a bunch of internal tension. As you try to sequester this side of yourself, you have to also block off anything adjacent to it. And then it leads to this sort of overly strong, like, shutting down of yourself. And it can make you just feel blunted and not really as alive. And on the other hand, like if you just do full on transsexualism, there's also obviously medical risks with that, and shortened lifespan and not being able to reproduce. So yeah, I'm hoping to get this information out there so that like to also make transvestites more visible too, so that it's because right now transsexuals are running the show in terms of discourse, and they're living it full time and putting their bodies on the line in a really real way. So it makes sense why they have such a privileged position in transgender discourse, but they're a minority of the people with this orientation. Most people with it do not transition. And a lot of them are just like privately confused and don't even talk to anyone about their gender feelings. So there's actually a lot more people that have this orientation that than people are really aware of.
Mm-hmm. What about dysphoria, like gender dysphoria? How does that fold into it, from your point of view, specifically speaking of autoheterosexuality or autogynephilia, the love of
Um,
oneself as a woman or as the opposite sex?
the gender dysphoria is a byproduct of wanting something and not being able to get it. It's a desire for something that can't be met. It's like that ancient Buddhist rule about desire and attachment and suffering. That
Okay.
whole trip. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, basically, if you have autoheterosexuality, um, you can experience gender dysphoria when you're perceiving that you have a shortcoming in your cross-gender embodiment, that you want to be more cross-gender embodied than you are able to, and then this disparity between what you have and what you want can cause suffering.
Yeah. And so you're kind of hinting that a mindfulness approach is beneficial for someone to.
Uh, no, I just think that that lesson about desire, attachment, and suffering that comes from
Okay.
the sort of like westernized version of Buddhism, I think there's truth to that. That's part of like the universal human experience.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Speaking
I
of
don't know what the solution is.
okay. Speaking of attachment, that brings up another aspect of this. If sexuality, insofar as sexuality has an intention, it's for, I guess there's kind of like probably a hierarchy. And saying that there's a hierarchy is going to piss people off because a lot of people want to not have any hierarchy in here. But if sexuality has a purpose, and that's a big if, the first would be procreation. And then on the human level, it would be to facilitate pair bonding. It does have a aspect of it, naturally speaking, of being desiring someone else, and then having them desire you, and forming a loop, a circuit, a feedback loop of intimacy. So, if the sexual orientation is already bent into oneself, one might be, through medical means or psychological means, cutting themselves off from allowing that sexuality to bind them to another person, to explore intimacy, to have attachment with another person, right? That's kind of, I don't want to call it a danger, but that's kind of something that you might be sacrificing if you're not careful about this and you
Um,
just allow it to just kind of overtake you, and not to frame it within the relationship.
for people whose allosexuality and autosexuality are of similar magnitude, I think there is some agency in sort of, you know, deciding how much to incorporate it into your life and whether you still want to have um conventional pair bonds with other people. But, there's some people for whom this orientation is just by far their overriding sexual interest, and they're just congenitally incapable of conventional pair bonding
Hmm.
with other people, at least until they address their autosexuality through like transitioning or something.
Okay.
So it's like I see what you're talking about, that there's, it'd be great if people could, focus on conventional allosexual pair bonding.
And
But
allosexual means.
just externally directed sexuality.
Okay.
It's the opposite of autosexuality.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, it's so yeah, it can make it harder to date people conventionally and to form the long-term pair bonds that lead to procreation and such, which is part of why I think it's important to get this information out there, because reading the stories about, like the trans widow stories, basically where women get married to men and then those men transition, and then, if they had kids, then it's like this, it's kind of a tragedy in a way. And so it'd be great if people could just be upfront with each other about their sexuality early on in a relationship, first, second date, like really early.
Hmm.
So that if it's a deal breaker for one of the people, that they save their time, especially because females have a shorter fertility window. So it's
Yeah.
important not to waste their time.
Yeah. That brings up the question about involving a partner in this. Have you read stories or seen research about pair strategies? If one person has sexuality, like how that can be incorporated into a loving, full relationship kind of deal?
I mean, it definitely does happen. Um, there there are plenty of auto-heterosexuals that are married or in long-term relationships with people that are conventionally heterosexual, and they find a way to either, deal with it and make it work, or some even like it. Because there can be some benefits to the women depending on the circumstances. You know, like AGPs seem to be a little more feminist than, conventional heterosexual males, and more likely to think about the woman's perspective. So it can lead to, it can help with their empathy and treating their partner better. But it's, again, it's a very like individual,
Yeah.
case by case basis.
Yeah. We can. I did do an interview with a trans widow, meaning a woman who married a man who then transitioned after they had kids, and it didn't seem like a very good relationship, and caused a lot of trauma and hardship for the whole family. I just wonder to what extent women understanding male sexuality in the way that you're trying to produce like could have a benefit. So what, just addressing a woman who encounters a man maybe after their first date, like maybe they've been together for a year, let's say, and then she kind of discovers that there's this other aspect to him. Like how would you explain it to her if like she was going to a counseling and you're not the kind of affirmative, he's trans, you need to just accept his identity. Like what's the alternative take that you would bring to the table from a counseling point of view?
Like, this is the situation of where people have been dating for a year and she
Yeah,
just
let's
found
say,
out.
yeah, let's just say
Oh
something.
God.
They're already committed, so they already kind of, it's worth them
Okay.
doing some counseling about this because they do.
There's already the issue of like lying by omission and the feeling of betrayal she might have.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because that's a pretty big thing to not tell your partner. But yeah, I would tell such a person that this is a part of your partner's sexuality that is unlikely to change. As hard as you might wish it away, it won't go away. And so if it's a deal breaker for you, then
Cut your
then it just
losses.
simply is,
Yeah.
but there's some women that are okay with it, particularly if they're bisexual. And bisexuality is more common among women. So
Okay.
yeah, it seems like a lot of AGPs get with women that are at least a little bisexual. And that seems to work out.
Because there's a little bit more wiggle room.
Right. Yeah. The bisexual woman will be a little more open to both aspects of their partner's gender. And yeah, and it doesn't, if someone's attracted to both sexes, then being a gender nonconforming isn't necessarily a deal breaker.
Yeah. Yeah. So the radical feminist critique, or somebody bringing the radical feminist critique to this, if they say, if they discover that their male partner, a woman discovers their male partner has this sexual orientation that is not likely to go away. It's baked in to some degree. Thinking of him as appropriating womanhood won't be necessarily helpful, though it's expedient on a political point of view. So is the man appropriating womanhood? Like from a sexual point of view, what is he doing?
He's embodying traits he admires in the other sex and that he finds attractive. He's basically, he's trying
Hmm.
to become what he loves. It's yeah, it's driven by this love drive, right? And
Hmm.
so yeah, when I hear radical feminists have that critique of appropriating womanhood. Is there It's really emotionally off base as for how it feels from the inside. And like it's like I don't dress in women's clothes because I'm trying to take anything away from them. It's because I like them, and I love them.
But if a man is trying to become what he loves, doesn't that take away space for loving the woman? Like
It can, yeah.
yeah.
It can, yeah. It depends I generally think the ratio between the person's autosexuality and their allosexuality seems to be a very big factor. Where, yeah, if their autosexuality is stronger, it can be harder for them to maintain a conventional partnership with a person because it's not as strong of a drive as the autosexual one. And so
Okay.
it yeah, it can definitely interfere with the ability to pair bond. But again, this isn't something that is due to like societal failings or anything. It's just how the orientation seems to work.
Okay. So this isn't necessarily patriarchy's fault.
Uh, no, I don't think it's patriarchy's fault because I
Okay.
mean this happens to females too. Like there's autoandrophilic females, and some of them decide that they can't date just because like they're attracted to men, but it just doesn't sexually work with them because it's hard for them to find a man that will play like a compatible sexual role. Um,
Huh.
so yeah, it can interfere for both female and male autoheterosexuals.
Is there, is there like a difference in the description and the behavior, like the manifestation of autoheterosexuality in females?
Um, so I should say, just for clarity, right now the top dogs of sexology, like Bailey and Blanchard, they're still not on board with the this sort of generalized two type typology that I'm arguing for.
Yeah.
Um, but I've seen enough evidence that their female autoandrophilia definitely exists. I mean, just yesterday I was talking to someone about my book in real life, and I
Hmm.
asked her some questions to see if she had autoandrophilia, and she enthusiastically affirmed
Like
those
what?
questions.
Like what?
Oh,
What kind of
just
questions?
like, asking um, if it would be like if intersexual fantasies, if she's ever like fantasized about having a dick or about using a strap on or things like that. Basically, any fantasies about playing a male role, and if those fantasies are sort of like a regular part of her sexuality, like that it's more than like a once in a while thing. It's sort of like a pretty constant thing, or at least like a recurring theme. Um, yeah, I mean, it does seem that females are more sexually fluid in general, so I think it might be easier on average, for autoandrophilic females to, figure out how to make their sexuality work um, with other people. But yeah, I guess you asked about how like autoandrophilia and autogynephilia are different, and as far as I can tell, um, it seems that cross-dressing is less important to autoandrophiles. You know, just like on average, it seems to be a
It's
lower
not as
proportion.
sexual to put on overalls and a denim jacket or something like
It is
that.
for some of them,
Okay.
but but yeah, no, it's the clothing seems to have less power to symbolically invoke that cross-gender embodiment.
Okay.
And um but autoandrophiles seem much more interested in the interpersonal aspect of socially being a man, of having other people treat them as men. And I see this in terms of just when I was combing through the sexology literature, looking for any scraps of autoandrophilia I could find, because it's really understudied. Um, After doing that and writing the chapters of the book, um, I I have two autoandrophilia chapters, and the first one includes, the anatomic autoandrophilia of having a man's body, dressing like a man, like all the subtypes, except for the interpersonal one. And I have a whole chapter devoted to interpersonal autoandrophilia because it just seems to be that common.
Okay.
That maybe female sexuality is more less object oriented and more relational oriented. And so autoandrophilia, it's more it can pretty commonly show up as like a desire to be a gay man. That's pretty common, which is why Blanchard has proposed a type of female gender dysphoria that he calls autohomoerotic gender dysphoria.
Hmm.
And that's about like females that want to transition and be gay men and have participate in gay male sex. And yeah, that seems to be the major difference, is that the female autoandrophiles are more interpersonally inclined. It's about how they relate. And the males are more about, the physical form of like having the body of a woman and, dressing cute, because the clothing is very tied into the body thing because it's like right on the body and it influences how you perceive it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You posted some interesting screenshots. I believe it was from Reddit. I think it was just a couple of days ago, about like these women who are getting off on opening jars, opening doors, doing
Right. Yeah.
a
The
dude
strange gender
nod,
euphoria.
like this
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
like weird gender euphoria. It's like, hey, dude,
Yeah.
And that's one thing, but also in the ROGD set, the rapid onset gender dysphoria set, the cool girl set, where a lot of girls are just creating these social cliques around treating each other like dudes, or like we're all guys, and kind of doing like that. It doesn't seem like that's necessarily a sexual orientation so much as I guess more of a transgender kind of thing. It's like, this is kind of the cool way to be together, to be different, to differentiate ourselves from society, to differentiate ourselves from our parents. So there's this whole aspect of it that Joe Burgo brought up after watching our first interview, about the psychodynamic aspects of this, about how shame operates in autogynephilia specifically. And I have done interviews with autogynephiles, and there's a lot of like aspects of wrestling with negative perception of male and trying to run away from manhood and into femalehood. And so sexuality is a component in that, but there's also upbringing. There's also questions of, just shame, not knowing yourself, not knowing how to be in a relationship, and abdication of responsibility, and being a man or being a woman, and all of the responsibilities that come with the reproductive capacity of the female, and then the expectations of the male to provide, to be strong, courageous, warrior-like, those kinds of things. So I know your book is about sexuality and the sex research, but what do you see the influence, and how sexuality is informed by these other psychological aspects and personal histories?
Yeah, although my book is technically about sexuality, I do focus mostly, I mean, it's hard to say mostly, it's hard to know, but I focus a lot on the romantic and sentimental component of the orientation, about how it it has these strong sentimental aspects that aren't obviously, it's not apparent when you're experiencing them that they're a byproduct of your sexual orientation, but as far as I can tell, they seem to be. Where like you were talking about those females that want to escape womanhood and be men together. That that can happen because the orientation changes how you perceive the value of manhood and womanhood. It makes the other one seem better, and it makes the one you're born into seem worse. And thus, it makes it seem more worthwhile to be like the other one in whatever way you can.
So that's an interesting way of putting it, or contextualizing it. So if you have these feelings of femininity that you express that come over you, when those are gone, when you go back to baseline and you're just left being a male, or just you're a male body without that feeling, you crave that feeling again, and so you start to despise the fact that you can't always have it. Or is there something negative about the male body itself, beyond just being a barrier to achieving what you want? That's
I mean, there's that aspect of it being a barrier. It's also it. Okay, you're not celebrating Pride anymore. The
Oh,
Pride
no,
hat
no,
goes
no.
away. Pride month is over.
It's a whole month. We're not even a weekend. Whew.
Yeah. um. Oh, I forgot what I was saying. Can you remind me?
Yeah, well, you said like a kind of either shame or just the from one point of view, you're saying that to be as a male, to be female is better, and to be male is worse. And so you have these floods of feeling like you're female or femininity, let's say, and then you want to enact that out, and then that goes away either through one reason or another, and then you're left with just this body. I guess you return to baseline. You're less than you were during that heightened state.
Okay.
And then you start to blame the body, or is the body itself beyond just being a barrier to becoming what you want and achieving what you want? Because the body itself, if it is a sexual orientation, your body is telling you to do this, right? Like there's a physical drive there. So like to despise the source of that, because it's not letting you achieve it, but it's also the source of that orientation too.
Right. There's when it comes to autoheterosexual gender issues, sort of just that cross-gender yearning, the desire to fly, to be the other sex. It seems to have there's two components to it. There's the repulsion from your natal sex, and there's also an attraction to being the other one. And so both of these forces act together to shift you across the gender divide. And, the orientation, like I said, it can change your appraisal of what's valuable and what's important. And so it can make the gender you're born into feel worthless, and that's like, and it can make your body feel foreign and awful. And so like, that's part of the repulsion. And then there's also that thing, you want to become this thing that you love. And when you do embody it, it brings you joy and meaning. And so there's also this joy that you're walking to. And so there's, this twin force of repulsion plus attraction that sort of shift people across the gender divide over time.
But calling it an orientation blocks you from, I guess conceptually blocks you from thinking, well, maybe it's the cause because of my relationship with my mother. Maybe I'm trying to, right? Or borderline personality disorder or autistic aspects of it. Like thinking of it as an orientation blocks off, or potentially could block off, like a multivariate analysis and then also blocks you off from tools of like overcoming it, because you're not supposed to overcome a orientation. It is what you are what you are.
Well, you're supposed to at least figure out how to deal with it, right? So the approach, instead of trying to fix it through thinking about your relationship with your parents or whatever, to instead thinking of it as, I have this desire that must be met to some extent for me to feel happy and fulfilled in my life. How can I do that? And I think it simplifies it to talk about it in terms of an orientation.
Yeah, but it blocks you off from why. It blocks you off from the complexities of why am I this way?
I mean, yeah, those other things are definitely factors, right? I still think it's unlikely that, I mean, particularly in males, that a male would transition just because of weird family dynamics. I think the sexual orientation is sort of like necessary but not sufficient in terms of like explaining transition.
Okay.
Like on its own, it doesn't always lead to transition, but I think someone without one of the two orientations, at least a gender transition, is unlikely to transition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see from a point of view of a young man who's very sensitive and recognizes that transition's just not possible, or it's it's not in line with greater values that he has of, I don't know, personal honesty. Maybe he believes in God and that God created his body, and he also believes in marriage and he wants to get married. To think of it as an orientation only disallows him from saying, you know, I do want to be in a relationship, and I know that this will stop me from connecting deeply in union with another person. So I guess we're treading into conversion therapy land a little bit, which I have not researched thoroughly, so I don't know exactly what is going on in those sessions and stuff. But I'm wondering if you've seen any evidence of people like over time growing out of their autosexuality and into an allosexuality.
Yeah, a lot have tried.
Okay. What's the
There's
success rate?
it's hard to know because the ones that, you know, part of succeeding at that, if it is possible, is avoiding hanging around the gender weirdos. And so, you know, say like in online trans forums or like particular Ask AGP, the subreddit, there's plenty of guys that'll come in there over the years and say, how do I get rid of this? It's bringing me a lot of shame, and I want to be a husband and a father, and I want to love a woman, and how do I get rid of this? And there doesn't seem like we've found a way to do it yet. Some people have reported success at sort of conditioning themselves to more consistently express their allosexuality, you know? Like say if while like I don't know if it works, but I've heard some people say that it helped them to, you know, while masturbating to make sure that, you know, when they orgasm that it's to allosexual stimuli and fantasies and not towards the AGP stuff, under the reasoning that, you know, whatever you orgasm to will like sort of become more of a solidified
Imprinted.
behavior.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if it works. I could see that maybe that technique could help for some edge cases where it is possible for them to minimize that. But it's again, there's like some people for whom the autosexuality is so strong that there's no tricks or techniques that they can do to change that fact that it is their major sexual interest.
Yeah. And what's the where does one go from there? I guess mourning that and then embracing that and then giving oneself over to it, or I mean, there's a ton of different paths, but what do you see as the best results from you know, Ask AGP and the other research that you've done? Once a man makes peace with that or accepts that.
I typically advise people to just accept however they are and to figure out how to integrate it into their life in a way that can let them still have a life that feels worth living. Because there can be a lot of black and white thinking where someone thinks, I just have to repress this fully and then it'll go away. But it sort of leads to a pressure buildup and sort of the dam can burst at some point. And that's also not ideal. I mean, it's unstable to have that sort of pressure inside of you, and then for it to, you know, finally come out in your midlife, it can just be really unstabilizing. And so I generally advise people to accept themselves how they are, realize there's nothing wrong with having this orientation. It is not innately harmful to others. You know, it all depends on how you act on it. And if you act in a way that you feel is not harming others and is also like helping you live a more fulfilled life, that's okay.
So you called this me search. So there's an aspect of producing this book, writing this book, researching this book, and now speaking about this book, promoting this book, that is about coming to terms with something inside of you. I'm wondering how that process has gone on over time, like all the reading and the writing, like how you've come to know yourself better, accept yourself, or understand yourself.
Yeah, I know I used that term me search last time, but I want to be clear that the book has very little about me in it. I think I'm completely irrelevant, and the science is what
According
matters.
within the context of the book, yeah, but
Yeah, yeah.
still, yeah, but it's still it's your
Like how
baby.
do I like how have I
You call it a journey.
yeah. Yeah, this is my gender journey. Um uh yeah, it was a weird process
Weird.
um to first realize that you have this orientation that you'd never heard of, you know, and you have to then mourn the loss of this old self-image of like I'm a conventional heterosexual male. I had to like get over that. Didn't take too long, just a couple months or whatever.
Hmm.
And then, you know, once I accept it, then I had to deal with when I'm open about it, people telling me that I'm being transphobic for being open about my sexual orientation and or like telling me that that doesn't exist or telling me like you just because you experience that doesn't mean you can say that other people do, you
Okay.
know. And so I've had to deal with that sort of opposition.
So they're erasing your existence
Literally,
according to
yeah.
their framework.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're erasing my existence. I mean, I don't actually think you can erase with words, but yeah, they're trying to like there's a weird exception where you can there's like hundreds of acceptable gender identities people can have now,
Yeah.
but like all of a sudden if you identify as autogynephilic or autoangiophilic, you're like you're bad and you can't have that identity and it's a little suspicious.
Okay. And
Um
how do you take that? How have you processed that or changed
it
your
was yeah, it was really hard at first. Because you know when people do have that opposition, you know it's people that at least like in my social networks, it's people that I'd previously thought of as like friends or at least friendly acquaintances, and to have them sort of be demonizing you for your sexual orientation on behalf of the Pride Coalition, just like the hypocrisy of it, and then also just dealing with the fact that people are trying to shame you for your sexual orientation. That wasn't easy. But I just kept coming back to the fact that there is an objective reality, and science is the least bad way of finding knowledge in that reality. And there's a preponderance of scientific research that indicates that this orientation exists. And as far as I can tell, I have it. And that basically it's pretty undeniable as far as I see it. And yeah, it's hard to at first to deal with people shaming me for it. I mean, now I'm a few years into this and I talk and think about this all the time, so I'm much more solid in my identity as, you know, auto heterosexual, autogynephilic, or like transvestite, like whichever sort of identity label. Um, and so yeah, when people disagree with me now, I'm much more capable of being calm and um yeah, it doesn't bug me as much.
And what does it mean to be an AGP male? Like autogynephilic males are autogynephilic males. So like, what does that mean? To what extent is it your identity? You visit forums, you talk about this, you've written a book about it.
Yeah. So it's definitely part of my identity at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where now? Like, where does it end? Where does it go? Or is what it is, and then you just move on as it?
Right. Like the way I think of it is this is something I was born with and it is unlikely to change. Um
Do you
my
want to
degree
change
of
it?
um like sort of if like if you were to phrase it in the question of like if there was like a pill you could take that would magically make you conventionally heterosexual, would you do it? Um I I probably would just 'cause I part of it is yeah, it being heterosexual, most people are heterosexual, and it's easier to fit in a society. It's easier to have, those strong pair bonds. It also would avoid gender dysphoria. Um, if the orientation went away, then the dysphoria would too. Um, so yeah, if it were possible, I would get rid of it. I don't think it's possible though. And I'm overall fine with it. Like it definitely has drawbacks in terms of pair bonding capacity. But since learning about sexuality, I've learned about a lot of different types of sexuality, and this one is not really a big deal in
Hmm.
terms of it.
Do we want to
Yeah,
bring up
it's
the big deal ones? Well, I
no,
guess, yeah, let's not. Okay.
no,
Yeah, let's
that's
even think.
not.
Yeah, okay. All right. Okay. Cool.
But the listener will have an idea of what sort of orientations
Yeah.
we're thinking
Beyond the
of.
pale. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, this orientation, like it's not. It can present its own unique set of hardships, but it's not definitely not the end of the world if you have it. You just have to figure out um, which ways you can live with it that, make your life worth living. And most people clearly pull it off. Historically, we did not have transsexualism. The medical technology was not there. Um, and while some like transvestites in the past did commit suicide from gender dysphoria, um, it's I don't think it's as common a driver of
Hmm.
transition as people sometimes say it is. Like it's really doesn't have to be a catastrophe.
Hmm. Hmm. Does it belong on the pride flag?
I mean, much more than the intersectional triangle, the ever-growing triangle that keeps moving in from the left.
The
Yeah.
chevron. Yeah.
Right, the chevron, yeah. Good. Nice vocab. Yeah, that's the word.
Here it
Yeah,
comes.
it's eventually the rainbow's gonna be gone. Yeah, no, I I'm probably I don't like the that new intersectional flag because it brings in critical
Race.
theory into something that used to be liberal. Like the old pride
Okay.
flag was a product of liberalism. It's saying like there's a lot of different people and we can celebrate their differences and treat them as equals. But the progress flag, this new one, it brings in critical theory, which slots people into oppressor and oppressed groups and raises certain identities over others. And it's this whole it's these are two fundamentally different flags in terms of the ideologies that spawned them and in you know what they're going for.
Hmm. Do you beyond euphoria, gender euphoria? Do you see that autogynephiles or autoheterosexuals, as you coined the term, that they have a take on, they have wisdom that they gain through this process, something that they can share additively to society, just as from that perspective, that sexual perspective, or not even sexual, but just like that gender's perspective? Have you
Yeah,
seen things about women and men and the relationship between men and women that you might want to share that you think would be helpful for men and women to understand about each other?
I think this orientation can help men and women understand each other better. Like an autoandrophilic female is gonna be wondering more about the world of men and what it's like to be a man than a woman that's conventionally straight. And an autogynephilic male is gonna be wondering more about what it's like to be a woman and what that entails. And so it does seem that there's it can help facilitate empathy and understanding between the sexes, which I think is valuable because there are psychological differences between the sexes, and men and women often don't understand each other. They might think they do, but there are definitely some differences in cognition that each sex just can't even imagine that the other one has.
And imagining that through compulsion, are you saying that it could lead to better understanding of the other?
I, I think it helps yeah, I think it helps the different sexes understand each other better. That there's some of us who, because of this predisposition, just ponder more what it's like to be the other sex and have more empathy for them. I think it's it's helped a lot with feminism. Like males who have this orientation are more feminist on average. Um, and so that helps, because like females are already a slight majority, and then if you just get a few percent more males because of autogynephilia, that small difference really changes the size of the pro-feminism and anti-feminism groups.
Yeah.
So it
Assuming
it
that feminism
yeah.
in and of itself is a good.
Well, I I think it's important to have feminism to some extent because evolutionarily, where patriarchy is built into us in the sense that males are bigger and stronger, and they tend to try to dominate and harness female reproductive capacity for themselves. Like this is seen among a bunch of apes. It's
Hmm.
not just humans.
Yeah.
And so there if we're going to live in this complex technological society, I think it's important that we do have some feminism to sort of curtail the excesses of patriarchy and make a society that treats people better than would be possible otherwise. There's the, like I definitely have. There's some schools of feminism I like more than others. Like I think radical feminism is flawed because it comes from Marxism, for instance. Um, but
Hmm.
yeah, I think it's been good that women have been able to over the past half century or so able to help them understand their condition and then work together to improve the way they're treated. And of course, that's probably going to go overboard, and then there will need to be a correction. But that's sort of the liberal process.
Hmm. Mhm. Where do you see it going, discourse around transsexualism and autogynephilia or autoheterosexuality? Where do you see it going? Is there any changes over the past year? You see that there's a foothold of growing people who are more direct about what their condition is or their orientation?
There's inc there's a small but growing group of people that are auto-heterosexual and are open about it. Whether they're autogynephilic or autoandrophilic. Um, it's still a pretty small group, but its trajectory is in the direction of getting bigger. And I do think this sort of idea I'm putting out there is it's been suppressed to a pretty large degree so far, but there's going to be a tipping point where once enough of us say like, yes, I have this and it's a thing and it's okay, that it's going to rapidly there will become a tipping point where people just know that there's two different types of trans and that's okay.
Hmm. Do I want to go here? What do you think about like education?
Oh, but you mean like the curriculum
Yeah,
in
high schools,
I would
let's say.
I would like I would like to see this taught in sex ed. So that at an age appropriate level. Like obviously you wouldn't talk about eroticism with like kids who are single digit age, but um if they're teaching homosexuality and bisexuality in sex ed, then they can also teach about autoheterosexuality. And you can get the gist across pretty simply. It's not that complicated. Like some people are attracted to other sex. Some people want to be the other gender just because they love them. It's pretty. You
Well,
can
it's right
describe
there, I
it.
guess. If they're going to
Yeah.
talk about transsexualism, they could describe it that way.
Right. Yeah. There's like it can be described pretty succinctly in ways that aren't too explicit and that little kids could kind of get. They'd be like, "Oh, you just love being that way?" Okay. You know? So I think I would like to get that in sex ed because right now they're teaching the gender ideology stuff, the gender woo,
Yeah.
and um I think it confuses a lot of kids and it makes them do a lot of questioning of themselves that they really don't have to do. And it's also it's not really based in reality. It's based in like what a political movement wants.
Yeah.
So, but it exists because people need an explanation for why transgenderism happens. You know, they need to understand what is this thing? Why is it happening? Like, how should I think of it?
Mm.
And right now, gender ideology fulfills that function, and that function needs to be fulfilled. And so, I think the only way to eliminate gender ideology is to introduce a replacement collection of ideas that can fulfill that similar function of explaining transgenderism. And that's sort of what I'm hoping to introduce here. This alternative memeplex that can make sense of it. Because I'd like to supplant gender ideology with sort of this gender reality of like what actually causes this stuff.
What about technology then? What's your stance on child transition? Is it worth a boy to transition to fulfill a sexual orientation? Is that adequate?
It's a thorny question. Like I do have
Yeah.
very last minute in my book, I did quickly put together a juvenile transsexualism chapter to sort of go at this question. I was avoiding it because of the controversy,
Yeah.
funny enough. But yeah, I'm still not quite sure what the right answer is with youth gender transition. On one hand, it's pretty clear that, you know, these kids don't really have the thinking capacity that adults have. But on the other hand, these feelings are caused by an orientation, and that's we still don't have the technology to change sexual orientation. So and puberty happens at an age that is before they can technically consent. We're sort of in this pickle where nature, it happens when it happens in terms of puberty, and we have these societal rules about when can people consent, and so there's this very weird situation where it makes it hard to know what to do.
Well,
I think it
if
you
you
know
rob somebody of their sexual capacity for the sake of their sexual orientation, it just sounds like it doesn't add up to me.
right, yeah, I do think that youth gender transition is being pursued. It's reckless right now what's happening in terms of the clinicians not understanding that there's two fundamentally different conditions they're seeing, and they're not so that they have no capacity for knowing like will this kid persist or not, because they're not even
Asking
separating
the
them
right
into
question.
whether
Okay.
which of the two types they have,
Which is, what were the two types, just for sake of?
homosexual and autoheterosexual.
Yeah. And homosexual transition's not even a sexual orientation. It's just, I would fit better into the world as a woman. Maybe there is some
Well, it's a
strains of,
byproduct of their development as like developing as a homosexual makes a person more likely to have like a sort of a cross-gender shift in terms of psychological traits. That they're a little more like the other sex psychologically. And so, yeah, even like with homosexual transsexualism, it's even though historically those were the ones that persisted more, it's hard to say. Like if you look at the rates of adult transition, it's the auto heterosexuals are transitioning more. And so it seems that
hmm.
the adults at least are making the decision like that it's more worthy to transition as an auto heterosexual. Um, whereas
Effeminate
yeah,
gay men just end up finding partners that,
yeah,
and
there's
going
been
on
a
with that.
reduction in that in effeminate gay men transitioning, or
You think
maybe not like an
due in part
absolute
to,
reduction, but a relative proportional reduction compared to the other ones.
in part due to the societal acceptance of homosexual males? And
Yeah, I think
okay.
so. I think
Yeah.
that helps a lot. Um, and I think with the homosexual one, there's a lot we can do as a society to let people be gender nonconforming, let them,
Hmm.
basically don't be rude to someone just because they're not what your idea of a man or a woman is or should be.
Mhm.
And, as a society, we have made great strides in that respect. And I think that's part of why homosexual transgenderism it seems to be less of a powerful motivator for transition than the autosexuality is, because the autosexuality builds over time. It's like it's a very different trajectory where like the homosexual ones, it's apparent from a young age, and for them to succeed with their transition, they have to, generally pass quite well and do it very young. Whereas the autosexuals, their desire to transition can be pretty mild at first, but then grow over time.
Hmm.
And so they a lot of them tend to transition later, because the desire grew over time.
Yeah.
And it seems like overall it is a over a lifelong trajectory, the autosexual one is a stronger driver of transition. So yeah, I would like to see clinicians start just knowing that there's two fundamentally different conditions here, and also take into account that males and females are different. And so there's like four different groups basically. If we're not counting the ROGD, I'm still not like, I do think there are probably some ROGD females, but I think it's being blown out of proportion, because I think some of them are just experiencing homosexual or autoheterosexual gender dysphoria, and it's just people aren't picking up on it because they're not even asking them whether they have fantasies about being the other sex.
Hmm. Hmm.
So like, how are you going to find out if you don't even ask them?
Hmm. There was a tweet by Ben Shapiro from the Daily Wire.
I've heard of him. Yeah.
Yeah, he's short and he talks fast. Some say he's
Yeah.
Jewish. He said that we should. This is just the quote tweet. We should teach boys to be masculine and girls to be feminine, and be tolerant of those who aren't. And maybe I'm phrasing, we should teach boys to be, or teach boys about their masculinity. But I jive with that. I think I'm going to formulate a question, but just my own point of view is that masculinity and femininity are core human characteristics and traits, and they're not they're kind of clustered or distributed according to sex, and that's why we think of them in terms of masculinity and femininity, and we think of them in terms of sex. But I think that they're also manifestations of human traits that can be cultivated and used to create great societies, and over time, different societies have different takes on that, different mixtures of that, and it produces kind of a different kind of feel. And if men are taught about masculinity from the point of view of what women want, right? What women are attracted to, they're attracted to masculinity. And if women are taught about femininity and why men are attracted to femininity, then they can, both sexes can regulate themselves and can regulate themselves in how they're approached and how they approach, and then how they become attractive to the other sex, or why they're attractive, and then how to manage that attraction. So I think that gender as a social contract, or as a social, just the dynamics of our dimorphic species on a cultural level, is not something that we should just throw out. I think we're throwing out way too much when we just consign it to this thing called oppressive stereotypes. But in the case of you specifically, or autogynephilia, autogynephilic males, you mentioned that the desire to become a woman begins to, it can instigate increasing despair at being a man, or just disgust with masculinity. I'm wondering, for your own life, if you've, in the process of accepting your sexuality, accepting your desire to manifest the female, if you've also done the work to accept the masculine side and see that masculine as beautiful in and of itself, because it's obvious that you're very masculine, your pursuits, your exactitude. I see a lot of that, and it seems like part of the spiritual take on this would be to achieve balance between the masculine and the feminine. And if you are autoheterosexual, if you are fated or wired to be, to contain your sexuality, that marriage to yourself should be a pursuit of harmony in and of yourself, and so harmony between the masculine and feminine. So I'm wondering, what's your take on masculinity, going through this acceptance of your desire to be feminine or to emulate femininity?
I try to recognize the parts of masculinity that are helpful and good, and which serve me. Basically, because the orientation will sort of make me want tend to raise the value of femininity, I sort of have to,
Idolize it.
yeah, it to as a countervailing force, it helps to consciously remind yourself of the parts, like the benefits of being masculine, and that it's not necessarily just a bad thing, that both masculinity and feminine are important in their their respective reasons and their ends, and that there's value to both. And yeah, like you said, I think it would be good for people to have an inner have their internal marriage be a balanced, cohesive one, where their inner man and inner woman are in a healthy relationship.
Is there like couples therapy for the autoheterosexual? Is
Not
that your
yet,
second book?
but that would be cool.
Is that your second book?
I don't know. We'll see if I write another one.
Yeah.
I might need to make a shorter version of this one just because.
It's great. It's very concise. I know it's kind of long, but it's very concise. I mean, and by concise, I mean like you get to the point. There's not a lot of fluff. Like this and then this and then this. It's very well organized. Very well done. Kudos.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like there's a lot of information in there, but I try to just
show me again so I can see how, because I only have the PDF.
Ooh.
Show me the thickness. Oh, okay. Well,
yeah. This is a blue Yeti for scale.
It's kind of like a banana, a fat banana. Okay.
Right. Yeah. This is the podcasting version of the banana on Reddit. Yeah. Yeah. It's an inch and a half thick. It's about 700 pages.
Yeah.
That might sound imposing, but dear listener, I assure you, I made the font size big so that
it's more
comfortable. Yeah. It's very comfortable to look at, so you're not straining. With the big font size, you'll also be turning pages more often, which will help keep you engaged and feel like you're making progress, which is important psychologically because we're competing with social media feeds.
Yes.
So,
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's very direct, but also very comprehensive. I explain not only this sort of inverted heterosexuality, but also the broader class of autosexual orientations that lead to other forms of trans identity. And yeah, and I do that because there's so much denial about AGP that I just wanted to show that this happens with other types of sexual attractions. And so if you accept the existence of even one of these other types,
such as what? Like the wanker?
Like trans species, for instance.
Oh, wait, you have to accept trans species in order to get to AGP?
Well, I'm just saying, if you accept that there are people that have this inner experience of feeling like they're an animal.
Wait, is there anything a little closer to home? Because that's further from home than AGP.
Right. Okay. How about well, yeah, transracialism is probably the most normie one.
Oh, really? Okay, I think actually AGP is the closest to home. So, because even transracial, that's a little far out there too.
Well, I mean,
are there forms of okay? And sorry to go here, and sorry, dear listener, to go here, but is there like a sexuality that's simply interested in itself as itself, like an auto-homosexuality?
Just strictly autosexual, where like you're just attracted to yourself,
or like I don't really need a sexual partner because I'm totally fine doing it for myself.
Yeah, there is, and yeah, there's an autosexual subreddit too. If anyone has that's listening, you can go there, and they talk about autosexuality and auto.
What is that like? Auto-romanticism. So you just love yourself as yourself. Like, so it's really singular. But
like people that have it like go on dates with themselves and stuff. Yeah, it's sexual and romantic, where they're like, I've seen, there's like one YouTuber. Yeah, there's like one YouTuber who has this, he has a video where he shows how he has 2 different Facebook accounts and he uses them to talk to each other. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Trying to be, I'm going to put my pride flat hat on so I don't start calling him a wanker, but it's interesting. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, and it's also like, as much as it might seem weird, it's hard to see the harm in it. Aside from like worrying about the broader societal thing of like, how are we going to have a fertility rate that's high enough to maintain civilization?
That's the problem with that's one problem that I have with sexology is not that it's the study of sexuality or the dispassionate study of sexuality. It's that it does not translate into any sort of ought. And sexuality and violence are the two most important things for us as a society to have an ought around. If you don't have an ought or a mores and norms around sexuality, you don't have society. Or every society is defined by their sexual mores, and then to a greater extent, their mores around violence,
Right. I see those
sexology
concerns.
try to do it in a vacuum, but it always spills out. Like that's the problem with the P in
Right.
the letter P or the map. It's like, okay, we can conceive of it as a sexuality, but we cannot promote it we can't promote it at all.
You can't. No.
You can't even accept. You can't
repercussions of
accept it.
promoting. No. I think that one will, like, even though I know it is some people's sexual orientation, that's one that just can't be acted upon and can't be normalized because the repercussions are too negative. But yeah, it's funny how you asked me about these other types of trans identity, and that I think transracialism is probably the most vanilla one of them. And then
Why?
just because I mean,
Like the
because there's
wigger?
transableism.
Okay.
There's
Yeah.
there's transableism, there's transageism, there's transspeciesism, and like the more normie ones I think are transgender, which is from basically this type of, it's a variant of heterosexuality. So it's like that's as normie as it gets. Like in terms of autosexual orientations, autoheterosexuality is the most normie one because it's heterosexuality.
I think I tried to ask this question earlier, and I know it's a wrong question, but I keep on wanting to ask it. I know it's the wrong question, but like, why? Why would nature? I guess nature's just like throwing out
Like how
random
does this still
comments.
exist, right? Like
Yeah.
even though it's clearly not obviously, it's not obviously good
Is
for
it
reproduction.
advantageous? Yeah.
I don't, yeah, I don't, it seems to be negative when it's very strong in people, but I could see, but most people have it to a very mild extent where like, I'm not saying that most people, as in a plurality of people, have it, but like when someone has this as part of their sexuality, it's usually just a minor part that's like an occasional fantasy. And I could totally see if that having it just a little bit helps you empathize and connect better with a heterosexual partner without
Yeah.
it detracting from the connection. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I think it's sort of a Pareto distribution where most people have it mildly. And
Yeah, like
so
kind of like a horseshoe. Like when a guy when a guy like starts to idolize masculinity too much, it starts to become gay. You know, it may start out as kind of like I'm a male. You know, like as
yeah,
opposed
so
to
straight
female.
it's
and then
kind of gay.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
maybe this is so straight. Like this is the other way. Like I love women so much
this
that I
is
become to
exactly. This is another way of being so straight that it's kind of gay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
And yeah, so I do think, yeah, it is definitely a question of why evolutionarily does this stick around. And I mean, my best hypothesis right now is just that most people have it very mildly, and that this small amount probably doesn't
facilitates.
detract. Right. It probably facilitates connection slightly. It's probably not like an alpha strategy. It's probably one of the beta strategies, but most people are, not the alpha. So,
what's an alpha strategy? Is this like the
oh,
alpha
just in
sigma
terms
beta
of
thing?
like, say like with, right. Yeah. With animals where there'd be like an alpha male and then there'd be other males beneath them.
Yeah. And the alpha male
it's-
gets the cream of the crop, but the beta male still strategizes to get some.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I could see how this could help people find mates and form like a genuine bond, more genuine mutual understanding. I could see it helping in that respect. But it is definitely an open question of like, why does this even exist if it's harmful? Or like not harmful, but like it's not
Detrimental
obvious
to it, yeah.
how it's like evolutionarily viable.
Well, I mean, yeah, so much of our once we've discovered technology, like we kind of outpaced evolution, evolution's pressures, and so
Right, genetic evolution, right? Because I think
Yeah.
now it's mimetic evolution that's in charge.
you think?
Right. Yeah. You
Well,
think.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's why you write the book. So in respect
Yeah.
to that, and I think we got a good picture of it, you're trying to introduce more information into this discussion so that people can, that society can deal with AGPs, AGPs can deal with their own, themselves, their relationships, and then also the political landscape can maybe get a little less heated and maybe a little less forceful, and
Right.
education can
Yeah.
change and broaden out, and we can proceed a little bit towards that liberal ideal of kind of mutual acceptance, mutual respect, rather than ceding respect to the highest victim. And then, this shakes this kind of, your idea shakes the political standing of a very powerful, very
Oh,
small
this
political group.
this is going to destabilize the current state of the discussion for sure. It's like it just flips over the table on gender ideology. It renders gender ideology obsolete and unnecessary. And so this will be attacked incredibly strongly
So
by
even people who are wary of your ideas, wary of your take on things, could be a tool for them who have a common enemy with you. This gender ideology could use this, could have access to this, even if they disagree. It's still useful for a tool, but it also could help expand their understanding of what they're criticizing or what they're seeing in the world.
I think it'll improve understanding all around. And basically part of why the book is long is because I wanted to put a cohesive memeplex out there that could reproduce on its own.
Yeah.
And because I want it to outcompete gender ideology.
Okay.
Because I
So
think
you're going to need to get a
yeah.
department of autoheterosexual studies if you really want to
Right,
compete.
yeah. And part of that is just first of all letting a bunch of people know that it exists.
Yeah.
And then I would like to increase the amount of research that's being done into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to do that indirectly by making a bunch more people know about it, which will then trigger conversation and interest in it.
Questions. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I still haven't learned how to do the nuts and bolts of running scientific studies myself.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just like an enthusiastic fan of them,
Yeah.
and just try to.
What if you had an AGP influencer? What if you could convince Dylan Mulvaney to say, you know what, this, that, the other thing, I know I'm getting points, but actually, this is what's going on with me. I mean, what's your take on that guy?
I'm still unsure of
His
Dylan's
authenticity.
ideology.
Do you think that he's an actor? Like, okay, so you're saying like,
are they actor? Is he or she?
If we
or
accept
whatever.
them as they are presenting, which is a big leap in and of itself, then you examine it and you're still unclear, like, what his sexuality is.
Yeah, I actually ran a Twitter poll, like asking my followers what is Dylan Mulvaney's ideology, and I think a plurality of them chose homosexual, transsexual. But it's some people, some things that Dylan's done seem AGP, and so it's still not clear yet. They could also be like an actor ideology, so to speak, and that they're like, that they do have one of these orientations, but that really they're doing it
For narcissistic, self-promoting.
for like attention. Yeah, I mean, because Dylan clearly likes attention.
Yeah.
But I will say with Dylan, I do like their relentless positivity. They get a lot of hate and they can seem absurd at times, but like
it's a great
at least
strat.
they're being positive.
Yeah, it's a great strat. It totally covers your ass. Like, well, I just hope everybody loves everybody. I just hope everybody loves everybody.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Another very strong criticism from our previous video, blue eyeshadow, crime against humanity. What's your take on that?
Blue is the best color.
Okay. Even eyeshadow, crime against humanity. No?
I don't know. I wear it because I like blue, so
yeah,
putting blue on me seems good. Yeah, okay. I also have blue eyes too, so
yeah.
I didn't notice that comment, but
it was
I'll be
pretty
sure
recent.
I will be committing more crimes against humanity in that respect.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
What else
Yeah.
what else did you from that last video, the comments, something that was not just not just like your reaction to the criticism or anything, but was there anything that came up that was particularly interesting, like some criticism or insight that you recall from that you can answer here? Somebody's watching
Um,
this back to back.
there's nothing I can recall that really stood out as
Yeah.
like that really made me think or anything because I've been enmeshed in this discourse for a while now,
Yeah.
and so I've kind of already thought all the thoughts, so to
Yeah.
speak.
You've seen it all.
And yeah,
You've bent around the gender block.
yeah, it's I've been around that gender block a few times, and I'm pretty comfortable with like I know I'm used to the discourse by now. I'm used like I in this video, there's going to be plenty of comments calling me a narcissistic fetishist, and like I guess if they want to say that, that's okay. Um,
Well, I
I don't.
mean, beyond the name
Yeah.
calling, I'm just wondering, like, if you recall any ideas or if you pushed, if you've
No,
expanded
because a lot of
anything.
it's the a lot of it's the typical like gender critical like turfy stuff, and I've already thought through the flaws with that ideology, and it's just the abolition of gender is just not going to happen. It's just not. It's never going to happen. Um,
Gender's too
so
sexy, man. I'm sorry.
yeah, it
I'm
is.
sorry. It's just gender's hot.
Yeah, it's unavoidable like that because there's two sexes and they tend to think and behave differently and they have different sexual reproduction roles.
And they're
They're
attracted to each other.
right, and they're attracted to each other. Therefore, there are these cultural ideas that sort of rise
Signals.
up that sort of fit the temperament of each sex. And yeah, these like gender is a social construct, so to speak, but it's also completely it cannot be eliminated, and it's just part of being human.
Any plans for this summer? Are you going to do an audiobook of this? You have a
Uh,
nice voice. You should think about it. I know
yeah.
it's a total PITA, but I recommend it.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see. Yeah, I didn't have enough money to pay for an audiobook to get made of this, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I have had people say that I should just read the book, basically make my own audiobook. Maybe I will. That's a lot of reading. It's
Yeah.
um
Well, you did it to yourself, so.
yeah, but there was a lot I had to say.
Yeah.
Um
And this was
'Cause
your
there's a
first
lot.
salvo, too.
Yeah, definitely. It's yeah, it's the first album. Yeah, maybe there'll be other albums. Um yeah, but like I just wanted to make this one because
Okay. How do you feel
like
that
people
it's made now?
it's nice to have the real physical copies.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty pleased with how it looks, both on the inside and outside. Like I think the publisher did a good job with the font choices and layout and the cover. And
And how
yeah,
can
it's
people get it? Anywhere?
um yeah, it's gonna go on sale on June 13th. You can get it. It's gonna be distributed through all the conventional places online. It's not gonna be in physical bookstores because there's economic reasons why that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can find it on Amazon and other places on June 13th. And if you want to celebrate Pride by getting a book about the most common kind of trans, I think that'd be a great idea. And yeah, for anyone that's listening, if you've experienced gender dysphoria or you have gender issues or gender confusion, anything like that, and you have experienced heterosexual attraction in the past, this is the most likely explanation as to why you have gender issues or gender dysphoria. And so looking into autoheterosexuality should be your first stop in figuring out what's going on with you, you know? And then if you find that that doesn't really answer much, then there must be some other explanation. But this is the most common cause of transgenderism. And so this is the first place to look for figuring out why you feel the way you do about your gender.
Phil, thank you very much. Is there anybody else or any other place or resources that you'd like to plug for people who are looking into this, whether for themselves or a loved one?
Yeah, I guess so you can find me on Twitter at Autogynephilic. I've tweeted the first 15 or 16 chapters of the book already. So anyone can read it for free. Obviously Twitter's not the best format, which It's
Yeah.
by design so that you actually buy it. Free sample, but annoying to read.
Yeah.
And you can also find my writing and some more chapters on my Substack at phililly.substack.com. And also, yeah, I also do need some, yeah, I won't be getting royalties for a few more months and I need some funding. So if anyone wants to donate to my PayPal, that'd be sick.
Cool. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all the things. Just Twitter, Substack, and you can find this book about the most common kind of trans on Amazon and other online retailers.
Yeah. And pre-orders are up?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
At least the Kindle is, as far as I can tell. Yeah. You can start pre-ordering. Yeah.
Links will be in the description. Phil, thank you very much for your afternoon. It was great to catch up with you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on, Benjamin.